Hey everybody, it's Anna J. Walner with the Author Library, and today I am pleased to have with me author Kristi Charish. Kristi, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, Anna. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.
So I'm a Canadian urban fantasy author. I'm on the West Coast or the Wet Coast, and I write. I've got two series that have been published through Simon and Schuster and Random House, and they are with Simon and Schuster. I have the Adventures of Owl, which is sort of a archaeology, urban fantasy adventure. And then I have the Kincaid Strange series with Random House, which is a bit more of a murder mystery and the paranormal with a bit of grunge rock thrown in. So I'm kind of in the paranormal world, but sort of in two separate little branches. I previously, before I got into writing, I was a geneticist. So I've got this cell biology, molecular biology background, and I was in research for a while. So I'm kind of a bit of an odd mix of an author.
Hey, but that makes for some really great, inspiration to draw from, weaving a bit of science into, because urban fantasy, incorporates a bit of realism in the writing. So do you ever use that background in your writing?
Yeah, like I mean, I think you really sort of hit the nail on the head with the idea that urban fantasy is the realism in it. I think a lot of writers when they're just starting out, so aspiring authors and writers, if they're into fantasy and sort of the world building and sci-fi, I think urban fantasy got this label as being sort of the easier version of fantasy because you didn't have to do all the world building, because urban fantasy typically happens in an urban world. You've got microwaves, you've got cars, you've got cell phones, you've got, streets, you've got a lot of the same cities. So I think on a surface level, it kind of feels like it's an easier, it's kind of the light version. And it actually is a lot harder because, or I think there's sort of this hidden difficulty level where you've got all those things that are familiar to us, but then you've also got to set up, you've also got to make it believable. You've got to make the fantastical part believable. And
Yes.
how do you do that when you also have how do you make a vampire seem real? And keep people in the story when you also have a cell phone and microwaves and videos and filming and so it's that there's a deceptive simplicity to it when you get under the surface. Like you said, you actually really have to think about, well, how am I going to make all this fantastical stuff mesh with the real world? And my science background has been incredibly useful for me, at least, in coming up with ways to make things somewhat plausible. So yeah, no, absolutely.
That's awesome. And it does really help whenever you have a background in that, because you can really authentically, like, if people were to look up anything that you put, so it's a kind of a blend of urban fantasy, sci-fi, this got everything in there. But yes, I definitely agree with you. And sometimes you do have that world building aspect too, because although it's set in modern times, it may not be set in a modern, maybe locale, especially, some, you can create a world within a world kind of a thing. So
yeah,
that's
no, absolutely.
But Voodoo Shanghai is the newest release in the Kincaid series, which came out last year. But will we see another book from either of these series later on down the road, or are they complete?
Done? I think publishing is just weird at this sort of juncture in time. The entire industry. I think a lot of it has to do with, of course, the juggernaut of Amazon and self-publishing, and just I think a lot of the publishers are everyone's trying new models. And it used to be that, so the series have ended with the publishers, but more and more now, I see authors who are taking their series sort of off platform and just getting their backlists back and continuing them. So it's certainly, and I can always write new novels in the story. Right now, I'm working on getting new things off my plate. So I've got, I call it sort of my pandemic writing, everything I wrote sort of during the lockdowns and all the drafts that I now have to finish. So I've got a spy spoof I'm working on right now that I really want to get off my plate, and then another urban fantasy, and then a murder mystery, and then I'm going to go back and revisit those other series and see if there's something I can do. But even if I don't do it in the next year or so, I never say never. I don't have a book I'm writing. Yeah, I never say never, because it's just publishing. I think we've all kind of seen just how much publishing has changed. If 5 years ago, you did not find hybrid authors, you were either self-published or you were traditionally published, and never the two shall meet. And now all the traditionally published authors and a lot of New York Times bestsellers that I know also have their hybrid stuff that they've self-published. So it's, so I never say never, but it's an interesting, the question kind of opens up an interesting comment on the publishing world.
True. Very true. And, there's always the potential for you to revisit the series, maybe in another, or some of the characters in another series that you're writing, having them to make a cameo. I mean, we always come up with these, fantastic, creative ways to kind of keep the characters alive, and in a way, if we'd like, they can make cameos, they can make appearances. And with urban fantasy, that's entirely doable, because we've got planes, and we can send them to another storyline.
Yeah, absolutely.
For a couple of chapters.
And they make nice Easter eggs for people who read, for readers who read throughout the series. It's like, wait a minute.
Right. Well, so the Kincaid series follows, a voodoo practitioner named Kincaid Strange. How would you describe her as a character? Because this is the newest series, the freshest series that you have. So if people wanted to get involved in the series, it's complete and it's ready to binge.
It's ready to go. Yeah. So Kincaid Strange is and definitely the titles went with sort of the voodoo. The publishers sort of ran with the voodoo theme. I wouldn't call her a voodoo practitioner, but she's certainly a practitioner. So she definitely, her sort of shtick is she communes with the dead. And in this kind of world, there's sort of a thinness between the veil of the living and the dead, and so she will talk to people through mirrors, and through the dead through mirrors, and through summoning them. But typically, as things usually go, when something fantastical becomes day to day, it's for things like will disputes, and the occasional, where's the money hidden, and I can't believe you left everything to the goldfish, and things like, for witnesses, for the police, but also she gets, occasionally, you have a bunch of students up at the frat who want, a beer zombie who has ID so they can get beer. And her biggest thing that she does, though, is her roommate is the ghost of grunge rocker, the great Nathan Cade. And everybody wants him for sort of guitar lessons and the odd sort of impromptu house party concert up at the university. And that's what she does typically. The two of them have this little thing going to make rent. That's kind of where she finds herself. And the world of sort of summoning and voodoo practicing and all the different things that fall under that, come under sort of fire of the culture and society at large, where often, it's kind of relegated to this undertone and underworld. People don't like to everybody needs to talk to the dead, but people don't like to talk about it or know somebody who does it. And so, Kincaid's had to develop a bit of this rough veneer to deal with that. But also she's definitely one of your, she definitely kicks off the series as one of your less trusting, more jaded characters that I've maybe written before. And of course, murders start happening in the community that get blamed on the paranormal community. And she gets put in a position where she needs to figure out who's doing it before she gets blamed, or she ends up the next target.
And it sounds like I can just imagine her dialogue as this quick, witty witticism kind of, a little bit of a smarty.
I aim for that, and I certainly hope for that, but it's always a fingers crossed if it actually comes across. But yeah, those are definitely the kinds of characters I enjoy and I enjoy writing.
I love that. Now, the Owl series follows Alex, better known as Owl, and although she's an archaeologist, pretty normal job, kind of. She's also in a world where magic, vampires, and dragons exist. I mean, this sounds like a crazy world. We were talking about, how you don't necessarily have to do world building, but yet you've got, dragons and vampires in our world. So can we talk about how did you come up with that? How did that get interwoven?
I had a real love. Owls was the first book I ever, Owl and the Japanese Circus is the first book in the series. And that was the first one I ever got published. I was writing that while I was doing my PhD thesis and my postdoc. Oh, wow. And I sort of sent it out to agents as a bit of a lark to see if I could, figured I'd try that route and then I would just self-publish it. And it got picked up. But when I was writing it, I was heavily inspired by sort of the archaeology adventure genre. So things like Indiana Jones, and of course, The Mummy, and of course, a video game series, Uncharted. Is another one that heavily influenced. So all of that kind of adventure archaeology just really influenced me, because I loved Goonies, of course, is another one.
Oh God, 80s. Yeah.
So
right?
yeah, so that's kind of what I had in mind. But a lot of those series that I grew up with, they very much featured male protagonists. So it was always the guy who got to do all the fun adventure stuff.
Fun stuff.
The fun stuff. And so I started off with a female character. And originally I was aiming to do something that was a little more straight-laced. It was just going to be a straight archaeology thief working with gangs and gets roped up with gangs and the international antiquities trade. And about halfway through the first chapter, I'm just like, yeah, no, there's got to be a dragon in here, because I love urban fantasy. And so how do I decide what kind of crazy stuff I'm going to put into a novel? A lot of it for me is very organic. So I started off the series writing a chase scene where she's just stolen something. She's just she's just shipped it off to her supplier and something's gone wrong. Who would be buying things from a disgraced archaeologist who specializes in supernatural artifacts effectively? And it would be, somebody who probably is part of the paranormal community and has a lot of money. And what kind of supernatural? So where's somewhere where they have lots of money? Well, Vegas, of course, and everybody in Vegas. You hear about these, casinos where they collect these weird and wonderful artifacts from all over the world, and these arts and things. And so it's like, what kind of supernatural creature would live in Vegas in one of these palatial type of casinos? And I was like, well, the dragon's sitting on its hoard of treasure and collecting its hoard of treasure, with this unending a trail of, gamblers and people coming in, to feed them with treasure and the odd thief. So a lot of it for me, it's like, okay, well, that logically makes sense for me. And if it makes logical sense for me, it's easier to do sort of that, the sleight of hand to hopefully make it believable to my readers. And that's kind of where I go. And same thing goes with the vampires. And that's maybe where some of the science stuff comes in. It's like, all right, well, we've got vampires who maybe live hundreds or thousands of years. They're going to have lots of money, but they also probably want to stay hidden. But they maybe want people to find their artifacts occasionally that they've gone missing and they haven't seen in a few hundred years. But what would make them dangerous? What would make them make sense? And so I for my vampires, I came up with sort of a pheromone-based system that, highly addictive pheromone that they sort of, that ebbs off of them, an aromatic pheromone that of course acts like a very strange opiate and makes people very weak and also is highly addictive. And that would work great for a vampire. And it also makes them quite dangerous in a way that isn't so magical. Which is kind of what I was going for. So as I write the novels and I sort of do the adventures, that's kind of what I do the whole way through. And hopefully, hopefully it works.
That is so neat. So, I've got to check. I will have to say, you've sold me on, and I've got to check into that, to the owl series. But now for and you kind of answered the big question. Where do we go from here? You always said that you're always working on something new. Absolutely get that, because we're always working on something new. So do you think that you'll stay in the genre of urban fantasy, or do you think that you will, that you'll, do you have an urge to branch out into a different genre?
I'm going to be doing a lot, I think. So I still am into urban fantasy. And of course, we have pandemic work environment here.
Right.
So for the most part, I think that, I do have another urban fantasy lined up that has to do with, movie sets and extras who start going missing. They find out with a production company that's moved into town, and they've got a very strange roster of stars and directors. It has its sort of urban fantasy mix. And of course, all the extras start going missing because they're completely and utterly forgettable. That's their job. And so that's an urban fantasy. And then I've started branching off into things that are more, I think branching off is always good for an author. It's never a good idea to abandon a particular genre that you're good in. And I've seen authors do that before. I adore urban fantasy. I adore sci-fi. So of course I'm always going to keep writing in those arenas. But I think it's also great to explore other areas and other things that I love. I love murder mysteries. I love these British cozy murder mysteries that have this strange veneer of, living in this quaint, beautiful, safe, quiet town, yet there's a murder every single week. It's this, sort of absurdity that comes into it. So I'm very interested in those kinds of projects. Also just, more of a realistic murder mystery with just a touch of the the paranormal that may or may not be
thrown
there.
In.
Yeah,
Right?
the hint of it, and I'm curious if I can write something where it's, where it is sort of a straight-laced murder mystery, but there's just that hint. You never know.
A sprinkle.
The sprinkle. That's a great way to put it. Yeah. And chicklet too. Chicklet is just such
fun,
this wonderful, beautiful, fun genre. And so, I've got another sort of draft I'm working on, which is also chicklet, more of a murder mystery on a a cruise ship kind of thing. So yeah, so I've always got new projects, whether or not they go somewhere is, you know, I think there's, I try and balance it. You know I can do a good urban fantasy. I know I can do a good murder mystery. The question is, but it's great to explore other things. And if they don't go somewhere, or, you know, that's fine too. You know, the experiment is worth it.
You know, is stretching your creativity and flexing those creative muscles sometimes is just so much fun, even if it doesn't go anywhere. Just to write the story and get it out, you know, it's kind of a fun experience, and it keeps those creative juices kind of flowing. I mean, for me,
absolutely.
So.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think it's a great way to do things.
Well, everyone, make sure to check out Kristi's links in the description below so that you can check out her Kincaid series and the Owl series, which I definitely am, because that sounds like a hoot. Sorry.
Good job.
But I've been holding on to that one for a minute. But everybody, thank you so much. And Kristi, thank you so much for joining me today. I had a fantastic time talking about both of your series, and I can't wait to see what you have coming up next.
Thanks so much, Anna. Thanks for having me.
Everybody else, stay safe, stay healthy. If you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Make sure that you don't miss out on some great upcoming content, and we will see you again soon. Bye-bye.